Betaflight 4.4 has just entered the release candidate window, and that means it is nearly ready for official release. And that means it's time for me to try out Betaflight 4.4. And I'm pretty excited because they've implemented a couple of new features that people have been asking for a long time that I'm super excited about, as well as a whole bunch of other little just quality of life improvements. I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today. 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 Guess I'm doing it different now. At the end of this video, I'm going to show you how to download and install Betaflight 4.4 today, if you don't already know how to do that. But before I do that, let me just convince you that there's some stuff in here that's worth checking out. And in case you didn't already know this, you can always go to the GitHub page for Betaflight or Betaflight Configurator, go to the releases page, and then scroll down until you see what's changed. And that's actually a complete list, well, pretty complete list of everything that's been added, fixed, and changed in these new releases. You could literally just scroll back through history looking at all of the new stuff as it happened. And that's always where I start when I'm trying to understand what's new in a new version of Betaflight. But there's a lot of stuff there, and you probably don't care about a lot of it. So let's focus on the really big, important stuff. And one of the most exciting features of Betaflight 4.4 is kind of buried. Hang on, I'll just search for GPS. Here we go. Updated GPS rescue by CTZ Snooze in pull request 11579. That little innocuous bullet point actually represents a huge step forward for Betaflight, at least if you care about GPS-assisted flight. Betaflight has had GPS rescue for several releases now, and there's a reason they don't call it GPS return to home. Because return to home implies like that the quad will fly home and then sort of land and everything will be fine. And GPS rescue is more like, I'll do my best to head mostly towards the home point. And then when I get there, I hope you're there to take over because I'm just going to crash into the ground or fly in circles until my battery dies. It's not really clear which. And I know some people have figured out how to make it work and how to make it more reliable and rely on it. But there's too many times where it doesn't work well for people to like 100% trust it, like you can with something like iNav or ArduPilot, where GPS functionality is core to their very being. Well, Betaflight GPS Rescue has been significantly upgraded. In fact, now it will supposedly fly to the home point, land, and shut down the quadcopter. Really? Alrighty, here we go. Alright, so we're going to fly out here a little bit of a ways. Not super far because I don't want to leave the visual line of sight of my spotter. And we're going to do our basic sanity check before activating GPS Rescue. We're going to check that the direction home arrow is pointing the right way and that the distance to home is basically correct. And then we are going to activate it in 3, 2, 1. Here we go. Now normally I would take over and I would not let it try to land itself, but we're going to see how it does. I got my finger on the disarm switch. Oh, are we descending? No, we are. Looks like we're directly above the home point. It's showing a distance home of 3 meters. That's got to not take into account altitude. It thinks it's right over the home point. We have 13 sats, so that should be plenty for accurate location. I hear it. 2 meters, distance home 2 meters. It's a little confused, I think. It's trying hard. It does not look like it's directly over the home point as we're coming down here. What's it going to do? Is it going to figure it out? Okay, that's not. Let's see what happens. Okay. Right near the water. Okay. Let's get that out of there. There's the home point. It was pretty close. It did a pretty good job. It was a few meters off. Oh, it found the only puddle in the whole field. And it did successfully land. But not quite DJI level yet. I guess what do you expect? Pro, baby. If you're as excited as I am about this new feature, then you might be tempted to flash Betaflight 4.4, send your quad off to the moon, and hope that everything will be okay. But don't. There are a couple of notes to get the best results out of GPS Rescue, even with as many improvements as it has. It's not bulletproof. Those notes are here in this pull request, and I'll link it down in the video description. I think I'm actually going to make a separate video diving into exactly how to do some of the stuff they're describing here. But for now, you can go check this out, read it, and if that's good enough for you, then you know what you need to know. The new high-definition OSD is another feature of Betaflight 4.4 that I am super excited about. Before you analog pilots get too excited, this is only going to apply if you're using a high-definition digital video system like HD0, DJI, or Walksnail. Sorry. They can't just magically make an analog system have more resolution than it does. They're doing their best with what they've got. But if you have a high-definition system, then you may have been annoyed in the past by the fact that your fonts were massively big on screen and the grid that the OSD elements are laid out on, check it out. So the OSD elements are laid out on this grid, where the grid is related to the size of the characters, and each character takes up one space on the grid. But when you've got a high-definition system, you lack precision. You can't put those letters necessarily where you want them. You can only put them here or here, but not halfway in the middle. And the other problem is that high-definition systems are widescreen. They've got these big areas on the left and right of the screen that you couldn't use with Betaflight 4.3. It put all of the OSD stuff in the middle. In Betaflight 4.4, we have the option to select HD as our video format. And when we do that, two things will happen. One is that the canvas that the OSD is laid out on will become a widescreen 16:9 canvas. The other thing is that the grid will get much smaller and give us a lot more precision in where we put these elements. Check it out. Here's my actual AOS 5 quadcopter that I've set this up on. So this is what my AOS 5 layout looks like. And I have no idea if this is going to turn out to be final. This is just my first pass, but I love the fact that I can put all of these OSD elements in the black spaces to the left and right of my 4.3 camera. If you fly 16:9 widescreen cameras, then it still will be nice to get them out of the center of the screen. But since I fly 4.3 cameras most of the time, that space is just wasted. And now it's not wasted. Now I can put my OSD elements over there. It's freaking amazing. The support for high-definition OSD extends also to the Ports tab, because you no longer have to go into the CLI and type those CLI options that you usually need to type in order to get digital OSD working. Instead, you're going to find the UART that your video transmitter is on, and that's usually going to have MSP enabled because all the digital video transmitters use MSP to communicate with the flight controller. So in my case, my DJI video transmitter is on UART 1. We've got MSP enabled there, and if we go over to the peripherals, there is a new peripheral, VTX MSP plus DisplayPort. This just automatically sets up your digital OSD without ever having to touch the CLI. So fantastic. If all of this talk has gotten you excited to try Betaflight 4.4, then you might think all you need to do is go into your configurator, go to the firmware flasher, choose Show Release Candidates, and then change this pull down to Release and Release Candidates, select your target, and then choose one of the RCs that now appears in the list. But it's not that simple. Well, it's almost that simple. If you have configurator 10.8, the older version of the configurator that was released with Betaflight 4.3, it will allow you to flash the firmware. But then when you connect to the flight controller, stuff will go wrong. Don't do that. It might appear to work. It might mess up your whole configuration. It might complain and not work at all. I don't know. If you want to use Betaflight 4.4, you need to download configurator 10.9.0. And you can look in the upper left-hand corner of the configurator to see 10.9.0 here. That's where you need to be. So you're going to go to this GitHub page, and I'll link this down in the video description. You're going to look for the latest release. Currently, it's release candidate 3. As time goes on, there will be RC4, RC5. There may be more. Eventually, they'll reach a point where they consider it ready to release, and it'll be 10.9.0, the official release. We're going to scroll down to Assets, We're going to expand that, and here are the installers for all of the different potential operating systems. I would use the Win64 installer. That's the one for my operating system. Now that I've got configurator 10.9.0 installed, the next thing I'm going to do is back up my configuration. Always back up your config before you flash your flight controller. Always back up your config all the time, but especially before you flash your flight controller. The way I'm going to do that is to connect. And then I'm going to go to the Presets tab, which is already where my configurator is, and I'm going to press the Save Backup button. That will load the configuration and open up an option to save that as a backup to my hard drive. Now you are good to go to the firmware flasher, enable Show Release Candidates, choose Release Candidates from this pull-down menu, choose your target or hit Auto Detect if your board is already plugged in, and then select the release candidate from the pull down and flash it. If any of that went right over your head, I've got a Betaflight tutorial about how to get Betaflight installed, get your drivers working, and all the basic stuff that I'm skipping over in this tutorial. I'll link it down in the video description. It was made for Betaflight 4.3, but the process is the same for 4.4. Cloud Builds is a new feature in Betaflight Configurator 10.9 that is really going to extend the lifespan of some of the hardware that we're using today. Have you been around long enough that you remember when we all had F3 and F4 processors, and F7 processors were super expensive and esoteric? Who could possibly need them? And then Betaflight moved forward, and F3 processors were no longer supported anymore. If you had a flight controller with an F3 processor on it, you simply couldn't flash to the new version of Betaflight. I don't remember which exact version this happened in, but the reason for that was that Betaflight gets bigger with every release. Literally, the size of the program, the code, gets bigger. And eventually it's so big that the amount of memory on the flight controller can't hold it anymore, and then what do? Well, one thing you can do is cut parts of Betaflight out that you're not using to make the code smaller. Like if you're a freestyle or racing pilot who doesn't use a GPS, maybe you don't need the GPS rescue code. Why is there all this code for S-Bus and Spectrum and all these other receiver protocols that I don't use? Why can't I just have the parts that I want? And in fact, Mark Spatz, UAV Tech, made what he called performance builds of that version of Betaflight that had stuff cut out that would run on the F3 processors, and that extended the life of them a little bit. Well, it turns out that Betaflight is getting big enough that even the F4 and I think the F411 and the F722 processors are running out of memory space and soon will not be able to hold all of Betaflight. Well, what are we going to do? Make everybody go up to an F745 or some other, I don't even know if that has more memory. No. What we're going to do instead is this. In Betaflight Configurator's Firmware Flasher tab, now when we choose a target and choose a version, we get this additional section, the build configuration. And what this lets us do is go through and choose which stuff we do and don't want included. For example, if I know that all of my receivers are Crossfire or Express LRS, I can just choose to have just Crossfire and none of these other control protocols that I don't use. I could just pick, okay, it's going to be S-Bus, fine. Once I do that, all of that other stuff will not exist. It will not be supported in this build of the flight controller. I could always just go back and add it back in and reflash the flight controller if I wanted to, but I can just pick whatever I want. The same is true for telemetry protocols. I can choose whichever telemetry protocols I like to use. You'll notice that where's Crossfire or Ghost telemetry? With Crossfire and Ghost, the telemetry is just baked in. You either have the protocol or you don't. There's no separate telemetry option. But with FreeSky telemetry, for example, I guess we would choose FreeSky Hub if we wanted SmartPort telemetry. Oh no, here's SmartPort. I don't know what FreeSky Hub is. SRXL for Spectrum telemetry and so on, or just none if I'm not using any of those, and voila, the option is gone. For motor protocol, most of us are going to choose D-Shot, but we could choose one of these others if we needed it. We'll just choose the one we're using and leave it at that. And likewise, there are a ton of additional other options that we can pick and choose a la carte style. I can get rid of them by just clicking this X here, and I can add them by just clicking on it here in the list. I can pick whichever ones I want. Now, today, Betaflight 4.4 fits on all flight controllers that are available, at least as far as I know, which means that today, the simplest thing for you to do is just hit classic mode, not deal with any of that nonsense, and just flash all of Betaflight. But if the day comes in the future where Betaflight is too big to fit on certain processors, this will be key to getting it to fit and extending the life of that inexpensive hardware. Mwah. Betaflight devs, stuff's expensive. It's really expensive now. Thank you for not forcing us all to upgrade to new expensive flight controllers just to run the latest version of Betaflight. As I said earlier, I'm going to select classic mode here instead of selecting the individual options for the cloud build. And we're going to load firmware and flash firmware. After the flash completes, I will connect and, as always, apply custom defaults. And then I will go to the presets tab and load the backup and just load in that backup file. I'm not sure which of the 2023. That's the date right there. That's the correct one. Okay, we'll load that backup. But wait, don't do that, because here's the problem. That backup is from Betaflight 4.3, and you cannot simply load a Betaflight 4.3 backup into Betaflight 4.4. You will get a bunch of error messages, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that may screw things up, like mess up your PID controller, mess up your filters, and just make your quadcopter generally not work right. Instead, here's what you need to do. This is the Betaflight 4.3 Safe Migrator tool. There's a link to it down in the video description. And don't let the fact that it says Betaflight 4.3 freak you out. I'm pretty sure it's safe to use with Betaflight 4.4. I've been using it and I haven't found any major bugs, but your mileage may vary. In order to use the Safe Migration tool, we're going to open up that text file that was created when you went to the Presets tab and did Save Backup. We're just going to open that in a text editor. We're going to select all, and we're going to copy that text. Then we're going to go to the Safe Migration tool, and we're going to right-click and paste all of that stuff in. And then we can go through and we can choose the sections of that config dump that are safe to carry forward and other sections that are unsafe to carry forward. And in fact, you could choose to leave some of these off if you decided you didn't want them coming forward. But if you're not sure, then the defaults are probably fine. And all you have to do is hit Get Betaflight 4.3 Safe Diff. It'll automatically generate a CLI dump that is probably safe to paste in and copy it to your clipboard. At that point, all you have to do is go into Betaflight Configurator, go to the CLI tab, click on the text box and right-click and paste, and hit Enter. Now, you'll notice there were a couple of red lines that scrolled by there. I see a bunch of them. This is not 100% perfect. There are some things that still go forward that aren't going to work. So we're going to just check those out. For example, we see a lot of OSD stuff has changed. Well, nothing in the OSD is flight critical. Like, it's not going to make my quad fall out of the air. So it probably, I might have to tweak my OSD a little bit, but probably we're going to be okay to just go ahead. Where are the other error messages? You're not allowed to change the board name, the manufacturer ID, or the signature. That's okay. We can probably ignore that. Anything else? No, we're good. So all of those error messages are safe to ignore. We can type the word save, and then it's going to say, wait, there were errors. And I'm going to say, okay, now go for it. Go ahead. Type save. Now my configuration is restored. There are a ton of other smaller changes in Betaflight 4.4 that I'm going to recommend you go check out for yourself. At least scroll through them and see if there's anything that jumps out to you as relevant. For example, they've implemented the ability to carry over the milliamp hour count between batteries. If you've got a large battery, you're a long distance flyer, you unplug the pack, you change your props, you plug it back in again, and then the milliamp hour is reset to 0, so you don't know how discharged your battery is. As a freestyle pilot who only flies 3 minutes, I live my life 3 minutes at a time. That's not really an issue for me, but for long distance pilots, it is an issue, and that's been added. You can add an aux channel value to the OSD now, for example, to use for showing the pilot's heart rate on screen. Okay. They've added ready mode for racers to indicate in their on-screen display that they're ready to take off without arming the quad. That's kind of cool. Oh, if you fly Ghost, Ghost now has MSP support. That means the Betaflight Lua script and other Lua scripts that rely on MSP over telemetry, now they work with Ghost. There's a ton of little stuff in here. Scroll through that list. If anything jumps out to you as particularly relevant to you, the next thing to do is click here on the pull request number and scroll through, and a lot of times you can learn more about that feature from the conversations between the devs. A lot of it goes over my head, but I can sometimes pick out useful stuff. Now, if you've watched this video this long, then I've got another set of videos that I think you're going to love. It is my Betaflight 4.3 complete walkthrough. I went through every single tab, every single option in Betaflight 4.3 configurator and explain what they do and how to use them. It's more of an encyclopedic documentation than a how-to. But if you're the kind of person who watched this video almost all the way to the end, then you're probably going to find that to be really enjoyable. I'll put a card on screen linking to that full playlist, and you can watch it through and you can tell me which one of the tabs I actually still haven't done yet. So I guess it's not a complete walkthrough. Crap! Now Betaflight 4.4 is here. I'm going to have to redo the whole thing. No, not really. Most of it still carries over. I'll see you there.